Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, Morton.
Well, I take great pleasure in welcoming you to our November Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We live in interesting times. Got up this morning, went out into the front yard, picked up both daily newspapers. I feel I have to subscribe to both of them. And usually at this point in our breakfast, I talk about something that was in the Washington Times, and I'll mention that in passing, but the main news is from the Washington Post that I want to share with you. Both newspapers covered the fact that CBS has backed away from broadcasting that smear on Ronald Reagan. But there was on the front page of the Washington Times a big story about a barber leading in Mississippi for governor and Fletcher having won in Kentucky for governor. And I read through all that carefully. And then I picked up the Washington Post. Nothing about Kentucky and Mississippi on the front page. Nothing about it on page 2 or page 3 or page 4 or page 5 or page 6 or page 7 or page 8 or page 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 or 14, and finally on page 15 they talked about Republicans picking up 2 governorships from the Democrats in yesterday's elections. You're supposed to be improving that, Sarah, not... Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not signed up already downstairs, please take a moment to fill out a breakfast registration form on your table. We're trying to clean up our lists, but several of our closest friends haven't been receiving invitations. Please put if you didn't sign up downstairs, we're reconstituting the list, and use the form on your table. And after the speech by Senator Cornyn, you can leave the form with me or one of our staff, or down the hall right outside the elevator on this floor. At the same table where you drop your contact information, you can, if you like, purchase a copy of this morning's presentation or a number of our past Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfasts. You may have noticed that we've been videotaping them, and we're now able to make them available to you cheap. Our Center for Print and Broadcast Media will provide these with as many of these individual tapes as you like at a mere $15 a head. In 2003, to date, the Leadership Institute has trained 3,021 students in 123 individual categories of schools. We have placed 51 job seekers through our employment placement program to date this year. And you have before you our 2003 school schedule. Please take a moment to review that calendar and consider attending one of our 2003 programs. Development people asked me to let you in on a piece of new and really exciting information here at the Leadership Institute. It's a program that was introduced to us at the Institute by former Senator Phil Gramm of Texas, and this program could greatly increase the conservative programs that we run here at the Leadership Institute. If you or your spouse are 75 or over and are residents of Virginia or Texas, this program could be an excellent way for you to leave a major and lasting legacy to the Institute without writing a check, or it's not a testamentary thing. It's truly remarkable. It's too complex to get into here. Senator Gramm explained it to us, and we're taking full advantage of it at the Institute. Members of our staff will be available to talk about this opportunity, and they'll be in the Kriebel room, which is just down the hall a little bit, immediately after the conclusion of this breakfast, and and the three folks who will be there are, and if you raise your hand, Chris Korish is back there, J.P. DeGantz, and there's J.P., and Thomas Dodd. There he is, right there. All the way up, Tom. Don't be bashful. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Mitchell for an invocation and a pledge of allegiance. Lindsay is an intern here at the Institute, serving as the Quality Control Manager in the Employment Placement Service under Jim Cromwell. She's a student at Dallas Baptist University and a member of the Young Republicans, a co-founder of the Dallas Baptist College Republicans in 2000. She's involved in numerous social organizations, serving on the Student Activities Board, as well as academic organizations such as the Alpha Chi Association, and where she was elected to serve as state representative. Is that right? Prior to her internship here at the Leadership Institute, Lindsay was politically motivated in Texas, served as an officer of the DBU College Republicans, the Pre-Law Society each year. Lindsay served as a volunteer for numerous campaigns, including Honorable Jim Hanserling, Governor Rick Perry, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, and John Cornyn's Senate race. After completing her internship, Lindsay is planning to complete her degree in public policy with emphasis in foreign relations. She then hopes to go to law school or get her master's, eventually using her knowledge and training she obtained here at the Leadership Institute and her scholastic endeavors in college to work in some media arena or public policy sector, influencing and advancing the conservative message. Lindsay?
Would you please stand and join me as we say the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Would you now join with me as we say a prayer? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the great nation that you've given us and for the leaders that you have designed and you have given to just lead our country in the furtherance of freedom and independence. Thank you for Senator John Cornyn. Thank you for members in the House and in the Senate like Mr. Cornyn who can lead in conservative ways and promote the conservative idea. And just, God, we just give you glory for today and what he's about to tell us and about help us to do our part to support people and to support our leaders like Mr. Cornyn. In your name, amen.
And now for an update from the Programs Department. I'm going to present to you Billy Parker. Billy is the National Field Director for our Campus Leadership Program. He has helped train hundreds of college students to fight the left on campuses across the country. He's been involved with us here at the Campus Leadership Program for 5 years and has used his experience to help develop the next generation of conservatives. Prior to moving to Arlington, Billy was based out of North Carolina as the regional director for the Campus Leadership Program, and there he worked with North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. In 1998, Billy graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from North Carolina State University. He's still very involved as an officer in the North Carolina State Capital Area Alumni Association. Billy grew up in Rich Square, North Carolina, and looks forward eventually to moving back to his home state, but I hope not for a good while. Billy?
Morning. Quick question. Who knows what Rich Square, North Carolina is? I'm shocked. 3 people. This is amazing. Usually, I may get one. Usually, no one knows what Rich Square, North Carolina is. It's a great small town. Obviously, a strong Southern culture with my accent. So hopefully, you can bear with me. I've got great news today. We just finished our 10-week field program. 10 weeks ago, we had 4 field staffers get trained. We packed their cars. They loaded the cars up, and they hit the road. hit the road for 10 weeks. Didn't go home. They lived in hotels, couches, wherever they could find a place to stay, ate fast food, whatever they can do to spread the conservative message. And we finally just came to an end of that 10-week program. And I think you're going to be really happy with the results. I know we were. In 10 short weeks, our field staff accomplished amazing results. They visited 113 college campuses. 113 college campuses. So just think about that for a second. You know, we had conservative field staff visiting 113 college campuses. And we all realize college campuses are not known for having a lot of conservatives come to their campus and spread the conservative message. They ran recruitment tables on 51 college campuses. So on 51 college campuses, you had the yes-no poster, and I hope all of you have seen the yes-no poster, a great creation of Morton's, and a huge poster of Ronald Reagan. Now, a lot of students coming by were happy to see the Reagan poster and the yes-no poster, and they finally found some kind of conservative organization they could get involved with. Other individuals came by, saw the Reagan poster, weren't so happy. Actually, in Wisconsin, I think within 15 minutes of being on campus, our field staffer got kicked off of campus because the Reagan poster was a little too offensive for them at Wisconsin, which is a shocker, huh? But that's why we've got him out there. In the 15 minutes, he did manage to sign up 5 or 6 people. And we did get a group started at University of Wisconsin, so they did not stop us from doing that. We also signed up 495 new conservative students. So at these tables, we had 495 new students signed up who receive information, could get training from the Leadership Institute, and are going to be exposed to the resources we have here. We had 74 meetings with students across the country. This is coffee, pizzas, and if you want to work with college students, how do you get to a college student's heart? Free pizza. You know, for free pizza, college students will do almost anything. So over pizza and coffee, we're changing the world. So these field staffers are actually starting these conservative groups over a cup of coffee. And that's where it begins. It's that one meeting that starts a conservative group, gets it off the ground. And, you know, hopefully a couple of years from now, these groups are extremely active. The most important figure I have here is we have officially, at the end of the program, the end of the 10 weeks, our goal was to hit 40. The goal was high. 40 new conservative groups across the country is a pretty high goal, but we like to set our goals high here at the Leadership Institute. We had 47 new groups at the end of the 10 weeks. 47. So that is amazing. We surpassed our goals thanks to the hard work of our field staffers out there. I wish they could be here. I wish I had all 4 of them right here so you can meet them and talk to them. I'm the lucky person who gets to present the numbers and have everybody applaud, which is great. But they did all the work. So if you meet any of these field staffers, if they're ever at the Leadership Institute, please grab them and thank them because they did tremendous work out there. This is it. You know, pretty much what I'm saying, putting the field staffers out there, how do we make a difference on college campuses? That's how. You know, you roll up your sleeves and you get out there. We're not going to make a difference just being in Washington, D.C. You've got to go on the college campuses. If we don't go on the college campuses and find the college students, they're not going to get active and you're not going to get involved. This beautiful building here, which I'm sure all of us have had a tour. If not, please find someone to get a tour today. They can't be exposed to these resources if they don't know they exist. So by going out there, finding those students and dragging them back here to Washington and getting them trained, getting them active, makes a huge impact. So that's what we're doing. With our field staff, we're going out there making a huge impact and changing the world on those college campuses. And thanks to our generous donors and supporters, the Leadership Institute will continue this success. We will continue to change lives and continue to spread the conservative message. Next fall, we're really hoping to expand this program and explode it out to 20 field representatives. Now, I told you what 4 representatives did. Imagine what 20 can do. If we have 20 out there, we're hoping to start over 200 conservative organizations across the country. So we just continue to grow and grow and grow. So keep that in mind. Next fall, when I'm giving these numbers, hopefully I'm reporting 200 new groups. Just to conclude this, the Campus Leadership Program's mission is to go out on every college campus and find conservative students and get them active. And we're not going to stop until we get every single university and college campus to have a conservative voice. And that's our mission. And until every single college campus has a conservative voice, we're not going to stop. We will have the field staffers out there. And hopefully with your support, we can continue to get this message out there and get these young conservatives active and involved. So thank you for your support.
Thank you, Billy. I've been on vacation for a week, and I hadn't heard that 47 number until this morning. That was very good news. Now, Lindsay Mitchell's going to come back up here and introduce our speaker for the morning, and we're certainly pleased to have you here, Senator, and Lindsay's going to do you justice, I think, in an intro.
Like Morton mentioned before, I did volunteer on Senator Cornyn's campaign, not just because he's a Texan, which is a great reason, and not just because he's Republican, which is another great reason in my opinion, but also because he has such great conservative values. Mr. Cornyn is actually a native Texan from Houston, married to his wife Sandy for 23 years, and they have 2 children, Danley and Haley, and they currently divide their time between Washington and Austin right now. Mr. Cornyn is a graduate of Trinity University and St. Mary's School of Law, both in San Antonio. Senator Cornyn also earned a Master's of Law from University of Virginia Law School in 1995. He was named St. Mary's Distinguished Law School graduate in 1994 and a Trinity University Distinguished Alumnus in 2001. Mr. Cornyn is such a family and conservative based man. He was the first in nearly 20 years to appear personally before the U.S. Supreme Court on 2 occasions, once on behalf of Texas school children who wished to conduct voluntary prayers before high school football games. His professional leadership has won extensive recognition, including from the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement for national leadership in child support collections, fatherhood initiatives, and client services. Businessweek magazine has called him a national leader on privacy protection interests. In 2000, he received an Outstanding Texas Leader Award from John Ben Shepherd Public Leadership Forum. We at the Leadership Institute are so grateful and pleased that Mr. John Cornyn has joined us on our Congressional Advisory Board. Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. And obviously, Lindsay's got a great track record in this last election of 2002, and I'm glad that she was part of my election. I'm especially pleased to be here this morning with what one of my colleagues might call members of the vast right-wing conspiracy, of which I'm a proud member. And I prefer to think of it as people who are really students of human nature, who understand that government that governs least governs best because it's conducive to maximum individual freedom. And we also understand that the power to tax is the power to destroy. And I'm particularly glad to hear Billy's report this morning because I can't think of any more important place to introduce true diversity than on our college campuses. I'm a firm believer in diversity, and especially diversity of opinion and diversity of expression. And for too long, it seems like our universities tend to breed political correctness. And I think what you're doing, Billy, and what you're doing here at the Leadership Institute, Morton, is just outstanding. And I'm just delighted to be here with you this morning. Now, listening to Lindsay's description of my background, you might wonder if this guy can keep a job. I started out in elective politics. In Texas, we have, since Reconstruction, we've elected all of our judges. First elected at the local level in 1984. I served for 6 years on the district court bench, which is our main trial court, and then for 7 years on the Texas Supreme Court in Austin, which is our highest civil court in the state, and then was Attorney General for 4 years before I was elected to the Senate. I served during that 7 years I was on the Supreme Court as an appellate judge. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the duties of an appellate judge is a person who hides in the hills while the battle rages below, and after the battle's over, swoops down to kill the wounded. So I believe that that gives me perhaps some special credentials to talk about the fight for our judiciary in the United States Senate Judiciary Committee in particular, where I am a member. Throughout the history of the United States Senate, no judicial nominee, let me say it again, no judicial nominee has ever been defeated by a filibuster. It simply never happened before. But so far, during this session of the United States Congress, 4 of President Bush's highly qualified judicial nominees have been filibustered by a minority of the United States Senate who stands in the way of a bipartisan majority that stands ready to confirm those nominees. And it's apparent that this tactic, as long as the Democratic minority sees it working and does not have to pay a serious political price for it, that there will be others. As I say, this obstructionism flies in the face of more than 200 years of Senate tradition. And in terms of, rather clear terms of the Constitution, which while it prescribes for a supermajority, when it comes to constitutional amendments, when it comes to ratification of treaties, is silent about any sort of supermajority requirement when it comes to confirming presidential nominees. And thus, the fundamental principle of democracy applies, majority rule. But under the Senate rules, there are those who are denying this bipartisan majority an opportunity to vote in an up or down fashion on these nominees by refusing to vote for cloture. And you know that cloture means that simply in order to cut off debate in the United States Senate and to have a vote, it requires at least 60 members of the United States Senate to vote for cloture. And that's really where the obstruction comes. Now let me just say that I believe that as long as this aggressive minority in the United States Senate thinks they can get away with it, that they simply will continue to use this unprecedented technique of filibuster to block well-qualified nominees. But if they think they can get away with it, they're dead wrong. It may take, ultimately, an intervening election to try to highlight the obstructionism that's taking place, but I believe that it will end. But I guess the thing that amazes me the most, and I've been around elective politics for a little while now. I don't believe I'm a Pollyanna, but there is no shame on the other side of this argument. There is no illusion or even pretense at respectability. The arguments they have made against these nominees is dubious at best and ludicrous at worst. It's a simple case of partisan obstructionism and nothing more. Now, when we talk about the Constitution, when we talk about how the Constitution clearly would overrule any Senate rule that would require a higher number of senators to confirm a nominee than the Constitution itself, and how it cannot stand in the face of the Constitution, our friends on the other side of the aisle say we really shouldn't be so concerned about principles like the Constitution. Now they claimed that we should reward them by voting to confirm some 167 of President Bush's judicial nominees, while they have filibustered 4 so far. Let me just say first, this fact of confirmation of 167 flies in the face of their heated rhetoric that claims that President Bush's nominees are outside of the mainstream of legal thought or judicial action. And second, while some of my colleagues in the United States Senate may have a higher tolerance than I do of such things, I believe that even one unconstitutional filibuster is one too many. Obstructionist senators, and this is the part that just is particularly disconcerting, but these obstructionists seem willing to stop at nothing. And in the process, they are not only blocking the vote on nominees, they are destroying reputations. And they are damaging people by smearing their name and creating a caricature of the flesh and blood human being that comes before the Senate for confirmation. We receive nominees from the White House of people who I believe will interpret the law fairly, impartially, and justly. And we have, at least during this last Congress, submitted them to vicious and degrading attacks. We claim to seek experienced and qualified nominees, and then we consign them to the dock as if they are accused criminals. We receive nominees like men and women of honor at our gates and then treat them as threats to civilization once they're inside our doors. Nothing, I repeat, nothing seems to be on the pale anymore. For example, recently a spokesperson of the National Organization of Women attacked Judge Charles Pickering, who had, by the way, been previously unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate as a federal district judge with lifetime tenure. But they attacked him as a racist, a bigot, and a woman hater. A representative of Planned Parenthood has said that Attorney General Bill Pryor of Alabama, with whom I served as Attorney General when I was Attorney General of Texas, and who is a fine man. This man who's worked for years against racial discrimination in his home state of Alabama, Planned Parenthood called him unfit to be a judge because he has, quote, shown incredible disdain for civil and human rights. Now, perhaps the leading spokesperson for these attacks is Senator Chuck Schumer of New York in the Senate, who has attacked all of President Bush's judicial nominees, accusing the president, that is, of, quote, loading up the judiciary with right-wingers who want to turn the clock back to the 1890s, and warning that America is under attack from the hard right, the mean people. He said they have this sort of little patina of philosophy, but underneath it is all meanness, selfishness, and narrow-mindedness. Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois recently attacked Judge Janice Rogers Brown of California, who serves on the California Supreme Court. But his attack really stooped to the level of outright parody. He and other Democrats accused her of being insensitive to rape victims, age discrimination, and even racial discrimination. I was expecting to hear that they had accused her of kicking puppies while she was at it. But the truth is, Judge Brown was born to a family of sharecroppers in Alabama, and she has had personal experience with racial discrimination and segregation. And I find it just simply appalling to see her on the receiving end of a lecture from the United States Senate about such topics. And of course, to be lectured about racial discrimination, given her life experience, is ridiculous at best and ludicrous at worst. In fact, the only thing that was more offensive than the low and unworthy caricature that Judge Brown was painted with by the demagoguery of her attackers was the actual cartoon that was run by a website called blackcommentator.com. I don't know if any of you all saw that during the hearing, but it was a caricature of her sort of as a female, I should say, Clarence Thomas, and it had her in wildly extravagant, sort of accentuated racial dress and hairstyle, and with Clarence Thomas, Condoleezza Rice, and Colin Powell in the background, and claiming that President Bush had appointed these people to these positions and that they were all unfit and unworthy to serve. But showing that even those who you would most expect to stand up to protect people like Justice Brown from unfair attacks have somehow lost their moral compass. Julian Bond, the chairman of the NAACP, said that that kind of distasteful attack on Justice Brown was, quote, money well spent, close quote. Now, Judge Brown has a good response to all this. When I met with her in my office before the hearing, and by the way, I introduced her to the United States Senate Judiciary Committee because her 2 California senators, her home state, refused to do so. A simple courtesy extended to all nominees, all presidential nominees from one's home state. And I warned her, I said, Judge, you are going to be savagely attacked, and I hope you're ready for this, and I hope you steeled yourself and your family to this. And her response at the hearing after she saw all this, she said, quote, people say it's just politics. It's not personal. But that's not true. It is personal. It's personal to the nominee, to their family, and to the supporters of the nominee. By blocking votes on the qualified nominees to the federal bench that President Bush has put forward, the obstructionist minority of the United States Senate is marching in lockstep with ideologically driven special interest groups that seem to be able to pull their chain with regularity. Groups that rejoice at the prospect of a Senate in constant gridlock. Groups that are interested in obstructing as many of President Bush's judicial nominees as they possibly can. These groups are interested only in advancing their political agenda through an activist judiciary. One of their leaders even admitted as much by saying, it's sad that not all of these nominees can be filibustered. I believe this battle, though, is more than about just these nominees. It's more than just politics and political attacks. It's a fundamental conflict between what kind of nation America is and what kind of nation we will become. I strongly believe that this nation has been set apart in the catalog of human history by our conviction that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not just American rights confined to our shores, but are the gift of a benevolent creator to all humanity. And it is the rule of law and an independent judiciary that protect those rights. And when we allow the will of the majority to be thwarted, when we allow for the rule of law to become a political football kicked around the field by special interest groups, when we allow political games to rig the confirmation process and dictate the makeup of the federal bench, the entire judicial branch of our government is imperiled. Perhaps we won't be able to vote on some of these nominees until after the next election, until the obstructionists in the United States Senate understand from hard experience that there is a price to pay for obstructing these nominees. But even if that's not the case, we have a duty to do our best to make sure that our courts are filled with honorable men and women, not robed legislators who seek to advance their agenda over the will of the majority in our representative branches of government, people who call the Pledge of Allegiance unconstitutional and who force their vision of society on the rest of us. I believe there's simply too much at stake to shrink from this challenge. And I ask those of you here today to do what I know you've already done, to continue standing up to this challenge and to the voice of those who are not interested in true freedom of thought, who are not interested in constitutional government, where the elected representatives of the people are the ones who make policy and judges interpret the law and don't make the law. I believe that we must not tire of this fight. We must simply win this fight. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Senator said he's available for some questions. I know there'll be some.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the National Committee doing to concentrate on the states of these obstructionists, educate those who are voting for the people and are responsible? They have to take some responsibility for sending these characters and continue them in the country.
The question, if I can paraphrase, I don't know if you can hear it over here or not, is what is being done to concentrate on those who are obstructing these nominees to make sure that they pay a political price at the ballot box. And that's a paraphrase. But I think what we saw last night is part of that. You know, Charles Pickering is from Mississippi. And what's increasingly apparent is, particularly when it comes to those nominees from the South, that the Democratic Party is out of sync with the people that they purport to represent in the southern parts of the United States. I don't know if you've seen Zell Miller from Georgia has written a book, A National Party No More. I haven't gotten my copy yet. I ordered it from Amazon, but I'm looking forward to it based upon the reports. But Haley Barbour was elected in Mississippi last night as governor, and I think part of that was a response. But it is going to be our job to try to make sure that that there is a price to pay at the ballot box, and I think that's what we need to do. I believe President Bush will take that issue to the people, and I think the people are overwhelmingly on our side. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that one of the fundamental problems with this is that there's not a price to pay immediately for a senator. The whole concept of filibuster was, I as a senator will sacrifice my time and what I have to get done in order to lock up the Senate on something that I really care about. Now they've adapted the rules that I write a note that says I'm officially filibustering this, and that's all that happens, and that senator goes about his full business. Why don't we go back to the standard rule, the traditional rule of making a filibuster a filibuster?
The question is, why don't we go back to the old-time filibuster where a single senator can stand up and protest this sort of behavior and lock down the Senate until reason prevails. And it's a strange disconnect between perhaps what we all were familiar with in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where a single senator can stand up and block, as long as they have the floor, block a vote of a majority who wants to vote, but in order to get something called up, in other words, to close off debate under the Senate rules, it takes 60 votes. So it's a little bit of a disconnect between maybe perhaps what we have sort of popularly understood a filibuster to be and the rules of the Senate to be, and what they are. But I want to tell you that next week there will be further efforts to do everything we can within the Senate to bring attention to this issue. We are going to have 30 hours of debate on these nominees, and we will literally be up all night. We won't have cots in the Senate chamber, but there will be in the side offices and elsewhere, because we are literally going to stay up all night and for 30 hours bring to the American people, and frankly to the people who support us, and let them know that we are fighting to try to make sure that we are doing everything within our power to bring these nominees to a vote. The other thing that we are trying to do is a rule change to limit the number of votes required for cloture or to cut off debate on nominees down to 51 eventually. There would be an incremental reduction of about 3 votes each time cloture is voted on, until ultimately it would come down to what I believe is a constitutional requirement of only 51 to close off cloture. The challenge we have is that some senators, I'll just be candid with you, who've been there when Republicans were in the minority, are loath to give up any rules that they felt were useful to them in other contexts when Republicans were in a minority. But I think that there will be more made of this. There will be more done in the Senate, and I think you'll see some bleary-eyed senators trying to do the best we can to bring this to the American people and to make a political price to pay. But ultimately, we're going to need the help of the grassroots and people all across this country to say, we're not going to take it anymore. Yes, sir.
Senator Specter asked a strange question at the Brown hearing, and maybe you can explain it, but if you can't, maybe you can just give me your own views on it. And here's the way it went. He asked her whether the supremacy clause of the Constitution meant that the Equal Protection Clause trumped California's Proposition 209, which outlawed racial discrimination and preferences. Now, buried in the red herring about the supremacy clause, there is an assumption that the Equal Protection Clause could actually be in conflict with a law banning discrimination and preferences based on race. No court has held that it does. In fact, the Ninth Circuit has held that it does not. My question for you is, if you could explain his point of view, whether he really believes that, or what is a GOP senator on the Judiciary Committee doing, standing to the left of the Ninth Circuit on an issue like this?
Well, only Senator Specter knows why he asked that question, but the United States Supreme Court itself has acknowledged that state law in California is no racial preferences based on the proposition you mentioned. And certainly in this federal system we have, there is not, I believe, a conflict between what the Supreme Court may say is a matter of national law and what states may do on their own under their own constitutional apparatus. And so I'm unsure what his motivations were. Certainly I would not have expected Judge Brown to say in advance how she would rule on that issue, if it be presented to her, which sort of demonstrates the absurdity of this kabuki theater that we're involved here. It's almost become, sort of the ritualistic asking of these very apparently to the maybe uninitiated, sage, very deep, profound questions of law, and ask these nominees without knowing anything more based on a hypothetical question to say how they would rule in advance. Well, to me, that's inconsistent with what judges should do, and that is judges should not prejudge. Judges should not be committed to a platform. Judges should interpret the law and respect the balance of power as set out in the Constitution. But I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for what Senator Specter's motives were in asking it, but I agree with your interpretation. Yes, ma'am.
I have heard several good suggestions here about people that being made to pay a price if you can promote that in your own states. And I think that it really were used as an issue in the 2004 election. I think that you're going to debate for 30 hours in the Congress, that would be great, in the Senate, that would be great. I think that I don't like the interpretation that people give about Republicans are afraid to do anything because it might be done to them in the future. For heaven's sakes, it's been done to them for years, for decades. What are they afraid of? So my question is, that's my statement. My question is, what do you think, if we could do it, would be the most effective vote against what's happening in the Senate? Because it is infuriating.
The question is that it's infuriating to see the Democrats doing what they're doing and obstructing the nominees, but yet Republicans saying we're not going to use every tool at our disposal because the Democrats might use it against us in the future. Well, I think if they get away with it, you're absolutely right, because it will be impossible to keep Republicans from conducting filibusters if we're able to block a Democrat president's appointees if the Democrats are successful this time. It's just simply the way things go that eventually everyone will use every tool, legal tool available to them. And unfortunately, I think that will take us in a downward spiral from which it's going to be very, very hard to recover in terms of how we select judges and how the process we put people through, which is, I worry that we're not going to be able to get good people at some point willing to come forward and see their reputations damaged and their names smeared during a very bad process. And if that happens, then we all lose. But ultimately, I think we are trying to do everything we can to bring this to a head. The majority leader is given a very difficult choice. Now, I made this statement at a Federalist Society luncheon the other day. Somebody said, well, why don't you simply use the what some have called the nuclear option? I prefer to call it the constitutional option. Others call it the Hulk option because Ted Stevens, the President Pro Tem, Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, sometimes wears his Hulk tie. You know when something's getting ready to happen when he's wearing his Hulk tie on the floor of the Senate. And I said that, well, the reason why it hadn't happened so far is because the Senate would probably just shut down and nothing would get done. And spontaneous applause broke out. Yeah. And I received that message loud and clear. But I think there is a desire, for example, of course, to pass things like the $87 billion supplemental for Iraq and Afghanistan, and some things simply that we need to get done. We need a national energy policy, so we need the energy bill to come out of conference and be voted on. We need to bring true reform to Medicare, and the jury's still out whether what's going to come out of that conference committee will represent true reform or not. I am hopeful but dubious. But the point is that I think we are fast approaching, as we approach the end of this legislative session, which now looks like it will be November the 21st, where you will see additional escalation of the battle and using literally every tool that's available to us, including the constitutional option, to bring this point home. Some have said, well, we ought to file a lawsuit. Well, I disagree that a court ought to be asked to come in and intervene in the Senate's affairs to try to tell us what the Constitution says when it's pretty clear what it says, and we ought to be able to do that ourselves. And I don't think a court really would have jurisdiction to do that. But I know it is frustrating, and it's the one reason I'm here today is to tell you what we're trying to do and try to explain that and ask for your help. Ultimately, even if we're able to get these nominees through, which I think is going to be very hard in all candor, we do need to have more than a 51 majority, because we can't depend necessarily on all 51 on each and every vote because of perhaps some idiosyncrasy related to their state or local politics to support the nominees. Yes, ma'am, I think, and I'll take. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Senator, first of all, thank you for your public service and for being here this morning, taking the time to do that. I wanted to ask you about the last point that you made, is that if the Senate establishes a rule which clearly usurps the Constitution and prevents the Senate from fulfilling its duty, its requirement under the Constitution, why cannot the Supreme Court rule on that? Why cannot there be a lawsuit saying the Senate has established a rule which usurps this constitutional provision, or put an end to it that way?
The question is, why can't the United States Supreme Court rule that the Senate has usurped the Constitution by imposing a higher vote requirement than the Constitution itself? And I tell you, in many ways, it would be very satisfying to see such a ruling. But I must tell you that I believe that as a matter of separation of powers, that no federal court has the jurisdiction to tell the Senate how it must interpret its own rules. And I know that's such an oddity because we've become perhaps accustomed to running to the courthouse every time that we have some disagreement as to what the Constitution says. But I don't think, we'll see. There's actually a case pending in federal court now that's been brought by some group asking for a ruling here in D.C. on that very issue. And we'll see whether the court accepts jurisdiction and what happens. But in the meantime, I think we need to do everything within our power, and that means the constitutional option, a ruling from the chair that says that the Constitution cannot be usurped by some Senate rule. I think that's what needs to happen, and my hope and prayer is it will happen before we adjourn on November the 21st. Mark?
It begins to look pretty clear that the president will be reelected. And if that is the case, then there's no question but that the most important matter to be decided in the elections of next year are control of the Senate and will conservatives get more strength in the Senate. I'm not surprised that the Federalist Society applauded you when you talked about the shutdown or talked about the Senate shutting down. But I remember once when Republicans, newly in a majority in the House of Representatives, bragged about how we were going to shut down the House as necessary. And in point of fact, Republicans didn't shut down the House. They would pass bills and Clinton would veto them, and the government was shut down. But Republicans, because they talked about shutting down the Senate, got the blame for it, and it was not something that was sustainable. In the case of this Hulk option that we're talking about, the Senate would be shut down, if it were shut down, clearly by the Democrats. Right. And don't you think that if that were the case, that would have a dramatic impact on the Senate elections next year and harmful to the Democrats?
I do, and I think that's what I hope would happen. I know that the media would not necessarily want to portray it in the best light for us. They would no doubt say it was at the Republicans' insistence that the Senate was shut down, and they would decry some failure to spend billions of dollars on some program or another that would appear to have some mass appeal. But I think we're simply at the point where we need to use every tool available to us, including the Hulk option. People are going to have to, in the Senate, I still remember Robert Byrd saying when I was sitting in the chair, and each freshman senator has to preside over the Senate a certain number of hours a week. It's actually a good thing because you learn a lot about Senate procedure. You see a lot of these folks who've been around a long time speaking, and frankly learn some things from everybody you hear. But Robert Byrd once said that in the Senate, no one is a permanent friend and no one is a permanent enemy. His point is that even though you're fighting with somebody today, you may indeed need their vote in order to get something you want done tomorrow. And so it is a very unique institution for that reason, in addition to the rules. And it's there is just a lot of tradition and long memories, really, of how those who are now in the majority used to be in the minority. And I'm not excusing any of that, or I'm just trying to explain it. But I do think that we are at the point when these unconstitutional filibusters are being used that we need to go to the Hulk option and take the risks. Yes, sir.
One more question.
You mentioned political price. Is it realistic to think that Schumer could be would have to pay a political price in New York?
I would like to. The question is it likely that Senator Schumer would pay a political price in New York? And I think the answer to that is no. The price, because he's got I forgot how many millions of dollars in the bank and no real opposition announced yet. I could be surprised, and I hope I am surprised. But what's happened is the folks on the other side will identify senators who basically lead the attack from states where they are pretty much impervious, I think, to that sort of political payback. But what we need to do, I believe, is to take advantage of the retirements of people like Senator Bob Graham in Florida, Zell Miller in Georgia, even though Zell has been a staunch supporter of the president's nominees, but Democrats in those states that are swing states. and to make sure that we do everything we can to make, where they are vulnerable, make them pay the price there. Thank you very much. It's been great to be.
Thank you so much, Senator. What a great presentation. How proud we are that you are in the Senate. You take the place of a great, courageous Texan in the United States Senate who is a great friend of the Leadership Institute, and I hope that you are there just as long as you want to be. And as a little token of our appreciation, let me present to you an Adam Smith tie. The Leadership Institute is the sole source in this country of Adam Smith ties, which are the club tie of the conservative movement and were the club tie of the Reagan administration. I came to the Reagan White House having worn it for many years. Ed Meese and many others were wearing them. Before long, people who were not Reaganites were wearing that tie for protective coloration of the White House. So,
I'll wear it proudly. Thank you
yes,
very
sir.
much.
Thank you. I invite you to join us next month, Wednesday, December 3rd, for our next breakfast. And those guests who have not toured the Leadership Institute are invited to a tour. Megan Griffiths here is going to give you a tour, and you'll have a lovely tour guide, and I know you'll enjoy looking at what we're doing and meeting various of the staff as they return to their duties here at the conclusion of this breakfast. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you.
Anything I can do